Good evening, second graders. Had to wear my bangles to rep Andy Dalton tonight. To the three of you who watched my science video today, thank you so much. If I knew by name who it was that is watching my, reading and math and special Thursday activities, you guys would be who I would shout out on Sunday this week for sure. So if you know who you are and you've done that, know that Mrs. Keller really appreciates it, and it's going to be better for you in the long run, you watching those and participating in those activities. Alright, we are on chapter 23 in The Mighty Miss Malone, and it is called Jimmie Blasts Off on His Rocket Ship. Later that night, a few people were still sitting around the big fire, talking and laughing softly. Pieces of wood crackled and hissed. I started counting the seconds between each snap. Do you remember when we talked about personification earlier this year? Personification is a type of figurative language that describes something that's not alive with personality traits or physical traits that describe a living thing. So obviously, fire can't snap and it can't hiss. Those are things that, people can do and snakes can do, but that is how they describe the sound that the fire was making. Mother had left for her night job, and I looked to see if Jimmie had fallen off yet. There hadn't been any of the twitching or soft whining he does most nights, but that didn't really mean too much, especially since I knew he'd found work earlier. If the job had been a tough one, he'd climb under his blanket and sleep without fighting against it too hard. But not tonight. He was looking right back at me. Something wrong, sis? Can't sleep? No, Jimmie, I'm doing fine. I was just about gone. You? I'm fine. I was hoping that mouth organ man was gonna play, but it looks like he's through. I said, he played Shenandoah earlier, your song. Could you sing it for me, just once? Sure, sis. Jimmie sat up. He says singing is like eating and serious thinking, things that should never ever be done while lying down. He took 3 deep breaths, held the last one, then sang. I don't know how this song goes, I will tell you, so I'm just going to read what he sings. O Shenandoah, I long to see thee, and you would have put your life on the line believing him. Way-ay-hey, you rolling river. He waited and shook his head and sang more. I closed my eyes. I imagined him getting taller and taller. O Shenandoah, I'm bound to leave thee. Jimmie's slowness when he's singing is all part of settling into the song. It was the same thing Father did when he told us stories back home in Gary. I'm not saying anything bad about her, but Father's way is so different from the way Mother tells stories. With her, it's like we're in a race, like she's all scooped us up and is flying with us too. They all lived happily ever after. When Father would tell the same story, things were easier, slower. It didn't take much to see yourself dropping breadcrumbs right along the trail, or hear yourself scheming right along with High John the Conqueror, or feel yourself riding a golden horse behind Sir Lancelot with your arms wrapped around his waist, and your cheeks surprised at how cool the armor on his back was. Hearing a story from Mother is like you're looking at the story from the inside of a boxcar. Things are swooshing by so fast, it wouldn't pay to get too interested or curious about any of them. With Father, it was like you were strolling along a road, holding his hand and stopping wherever something caught your fancy. Way-ay-hey, we're bound away, cross the wide Missouri. After a long sigh, Jimmie was through. I opened my eyes. He had shrunk back to his normal size and dropped down his shoulders and was hanging his head. He said, "Sweet dreams, sis." A gentle tap, tap, tap came from the wooden frame of the door. Jimmie jumped up. With his right hand, he swiped the gingham curtain aside. He dropped his left hand behind him, and my breath caught. He was holding another long, open, straight razor. He deepened his voice. "What do you want?" A man said, "Hello, Sonny. We wanted to have a word with your sister." "You can have a word with me first. What do you want to talk to her about?" "It's her voice. Jimmie butted in. "Why? We ain't being loud. Y'all couldn't have barely heard us." 4 or 5 people laughed, and they were kind laughs, but Jimmie's body tightened. I came up behind him and pulled his razor away. I closed it and held it against my leg. It was the harmonica man who'd knocked. He said, "No, Sonny, no complaints, far from it." He looked at me. "Evening, Missy, how are ya?" There were 6 or 7 men and women. 3 of them were white. They all smiled at me. I stepped in front of Jimmie. "I'm fine, thank you. How are you?" The man pulled his hat off and said, "I'd have swore I was doing just fine, up to a few minutes ago when I found out I was doing something terribly wrong." He opened his hand and showed me his harmonica. I thought I owned Shenandoah, thought I played it like it was me that wrote it, but tonight you took that song right away from me and made it so I seen how it's supposed to be done. As of tonight, I'm singing it over to you. You are spectacular." People called out, "Amen," and "Hear, hear." A woman said, "Child, do you have any idea what kind of gift you have?" "That's right, a pure gift." "But it wasn't me singing, it was my brother, my big brother." I don't think a prouder sentence has ever crossed my lips. I stepped aside so they could see Jimmie. "We tell him all the time that there isn't anyone else in the world with a voice so beautiful." The harmonica man said to him, "I played all over this country and I ain't never heard nothing like that in my life." Now, I ain't trying to boast, but I used to travel with Bessie Smith, and I don't mean to disrespect her none, but she ain't half the singer you is. Not half. Not on her best day. He reached his right hand toward Jimmie. "My name is Zeke Green. Folks call me Sawbuck Zee, and it's a true honor to make your acquaintance of a brother musician like you, sir." "Sir!" It's horrible what one tiny word can do to you. You can talk to yourself into believing you're tough. Then one tiny 3-letter word gets said and smashes everything apart. "Sir." I'd learned not to cry or even get angry when all sorts of calamity befell us. I'd learned not to take it personal when people barked at Mother and Jimmie and me about walking across their property. I knew how to swallow the sadness that would wash over me when Father used to come home, and we could tell by the way he worried the brim of his hat when he asked how we were doing and that there'd been no work. I thought I could control it all. And then this man calls Jimmie sir, and all of my hardness melted away. It was wonderful that these people liked Jimmie singing, but horrible too because I was still at the mercy of someone else's words. And Mother had told us so many times that that's something neither me nor Jimmie can afford to let happen, that we should take everything from someone that someone says, good or bad, with a grain of salt. Jimmie took the man's hand. "My name's Jimmie Malone, sir. Pleased to meet you. I take it you're a natural, you ain't had no training?" Jimmie looked surprised. "They can train someone to sing?" "Not like what you done. That can't be taught. That's from inside." "Yes, sir, it is." "You mind I ask how old you is?" "I'm 17 years old, sir." With Jimmie, lying is just like singing. They both come natural to him. "I knowed you is older than you look. Ain't no kid gonna sing like that. From your singing, I see you's a full-grown man." Jimmie had hardened his heart twice as much as I had mine, but from the look that came over him, I could see that when it came to those words, he was totally lost. Jimmie said, "You used to travel around with Bessie Smith? Really? You got to play with her? And you got paid? Cash money?" "I ain't gonna say it always worked out that way, but that was the idea." "And you really think I sing good as her?" "I didn't say that. I said you's better than her. Raw, but better. With a little work, y'all wouldn't even be playing in the same ballpark. Son, if things was the way they used to be, you could make some money traveling. Might even get someone to make them Victrola recordings of you singing. Nah. I said if things was the way they used to be. Ain't a whole lot of cash out here now for nothing. But if anybody was gonna rake in a little bit there is... But if anyone was gonna rake in the little bit there is, it'd be you. You got a true gift, son. One of the women said, "Young man, can you and Zee sing a couple of songs? It's late, but tomorrow's Sunday, so it won't be no work anywhere." I said, "Go on, Jimmie. Mr. Zee, do you know Motherless Child? You ain't gonna be able to name no spiritual I don't know. Young man, you up to giving these folks a little happiness?" Jimmie slipped his feet into his brogans. He said, "I ain't never sung with no one playing an instrument. Don't we have to practice some first? How am I gonna know when I'm supposed to come in and when I'm supposed to be quiet? Don't worry none about that. It's my job to know when to blow and when to shut up." I pulled on my shoes. Me and Jimmie were smiling, like a couple of Cheshire cats, on a Christmas day in Gary. I said, "We've enjoyed your playing ever since you came, sir. I told Jimmie and Mother that right along with Miss Toland, our Sunday school piano player back in in Lancaster, you were the best musician I'd ever heard." I slapped Jimmie's head. "We told you were great, and you just didn't believe it." As we walked toward the fire, Mr. Z put his hand on Jimmie's shoulder. "When you're working with other musicians, you gotta know your part. If it all come together right, it's like that stew they made for supper. Everything blended just right." Aren't too much of any one thing. When you and me play together, I'm supposed to make sure ain't too much mouth organ and too little you. You the meat in the stew, I ain't nothing but the salt. There were about 7 people still at the fire. Some people were leaned up against each other, close to sleep. Mr. Z sat on a stump. "What key you singin'?" Jimmie said, "Key?" The man smiled. "Hum the first bit of Shenandoah again." Jimmie did. Mr. Z blew some notes that blended in real nice with Jimmie. He said, "It's on you, young man, motherless child." Jimmie was staring into the fire, waiting until he was good and ready. Some people started giving each other sideways looks, like he had chickened out. After the longest while, Jimmie took a deep breath. "Sometimes I feel..." The goose flesh jumped through my palms as Jimmie sang, "Like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child." A woman yelled, "Yes, Lord." Mr. Z brought the harmonica in, and it was a perfect match for Jimmie's whispery voice. A man said, "Testify, brother." Mr. Z's playing danced around Jimmie's words and reminded me of something. In Gary on Friday nights after dinner, a lot of the Mexican people and the black people would go to the church hall for storytelling. I was shy when I first met the people from Mexico. They didn't look like us, and they didn't look like white people. They had skin like ours, and hair like white people's, only lots stronger and darker. They spoke a different language, too. Father was the best American storyteller, and a woman named Señorita Morales, but the way that she said it in here is Señor Rita Morales. But señor in Spanish means mister, so I think that she's splitting the word señorita, miss, up by accident. She doesn't realize. Was the best one from Mexico. Miss Morales was a small-boned woman, but when she spoke, she was like Jimmie. She seemed to grow. She used her hands as if she was talking about a star she'd reach up and gently pluck. Then she'd look into her hand like the star was resting there. If you followed her glance, you could see it too. You could even see a shadow on the ground underneath. Some superstitious Americans stopped coming because they say Señor Rita Morales was hypnotizing everybody. And who knew what she'd have folks doing once she got their minds. Mother poo-pooed them all. and said Senor Rita Morales was someone who could have words to do magical things. Miss Morales told the stories in her own language and in English, both, and you could still understand everything. Even if you didn't know the word, something about the way she'd unfold her hands, or the way she'd smile, or the way she'd look at you when she talked, let you know that she knew what you meant. If you waited, it would come. Jimmie and Mr. Zee were doing the same thing with their music. They finished the song and Mr. Zee said, Jimmie grinned. A white woman said in a dreamy voice, "My God, Danny, go get your daddy's guitar." The white man, Danny, was sitting with his hands, I think that there's a typo here, so I'm going to correct it. Was sitting with both of his hands on the boy's shoulder. "Rest easy, son." "Thank you, Connie, but we're going to let that guitar be tonight. I ain't got no intentions of being the alley cat at a gathering of lions." In the middle of the third song, I jumped when a hand lighted on my shoulder. "Boo!" "Oh, Mother." I pulled her to sit next to me. "Do you see how they're watching Jimmie?" Mother hugged her knees. Jimmie would say a song like it, and Mr. Zee would nod and play. I poked her. "He isn't even being a little bit shy. Singing belongs to him as much as writing does to you, Deza. Plus talking. We can't forget how comfortable you are with that." Mother loved teasing me for my verboseness. People clapped as Jimmie walked over to us. "Can I stay a while and talk to Mr. Sawbone?" "Tomorrow's Sunday." I answered for Mother. I know her well enough that talking to me is like talking to her. Least I thought so up to this time. "Oh, yes, stay as long as you'd like." That wasn't how Mother would have answered. Her eyes widened, just the littlest bit, but said, "Yes, Jimmie, have a good time." "Wow, sis, hasn't this been the best night ever?" I laughed. Indeed it has. Indeed it has. Mother said, "Let's go down to the creek, Deza. The sound of the water is so soothing." She wasn't mad, but there was a sadness in her as we turned away from the dying fire. "Mother, was I wrong?" "No, Deza, it's fine that he stays. He works like a grown man, so it's only right that he starts living like one too. Much as I may want to, I can't hold him forever." I did what all good conversationalists do when they don't like the direction a talk is going. I changed the subject. "Tell me what it was like when you and Father met." That always made Mother light up. She held my arm tighter and smiled. "Oh, Deza, we had that kind of happiness that can't help but draw attention to itself. We weren't trying to show off or anything, but there wasn't a bushel basket big enough or thick enough for us to keep our happiness hidden under." I loved the times when Mother talked about Father courting her. The man she talked about, who was serious and shy, seemed different than the happy, jokey man we knew. I dropped my head onto her shoulder and squeezed my arm around her waist. I knew all the answers, but I asked them anyway. "Were you too excited when me and Jimmie were born?" "Your father told me if I ruled the world, Peg, I'd give every brown-skinned baby a note as soon as they were born. It would read, 'Hold tight, because the only guarantee is, one way or another, you're going to have a very interesting, busy life.'" I said to him, "Roscoe, that could be said about any baby." He smiled and said, "Maybe, but not to the same extent." Mother and I laughed and teased all the way down the trail. At the creek I squatted down to toss a twig into the water. I watched the twig bob along. It spun twice like it was trying to decide which way it should go, then bobbed off downstream. I could hear the smile in Mother's voice. "You know one of the things I love most about my baby girl? You know one of the things I'm so thankful for?" I looked over my shoulder at her. "I love the fact that you're so much smarter than I am. Took him a while to catch on, but you're smarter than your father, too." I studied her face. How could I be smarter than the smartest two people I knew? Really, no use pretending, Dessa. I'll never forget the first time we realized how special you are. You never talked until you were almost 3 years old. Other than a lot of laughing and some crazy noises that your father used to call squinking, you didn't say a peep. We told each other we weren't worried, though, because you were such a watcher. We could see you were understanding and taking things in, so we had strong hope that you were fine. Mother smiled. I admit, I was a little worried. But your daddy said, I got a feeling that this one will talk when she's good and ready, and once she does, watch out. So what was my first word? Why? Because I'm curious, Mother. She slapped my arm. No, silly, I wasn't asking why. Why was your first word? Your grandmother Malone was visiting from Flint, and she was moaning about the fact that we only had milk for her coffee and not cream. It went on forever. You were sitting on my lap, and she said, "What's a woman got to do to get some cream for her coffee around here? I've told Roscoe again and again that nonsense like this is why I stay in Flint." Mother laughed. You piped up clear as day. "Why don't you go to the store and buy some?" We wouldn't have been more shocked if the salt shaker told us it wanted to go for a walk. That was the first thing I said? No, not that. It was why. I splashed her. I hadn't seen her acting silly for the longest time. Mother. Your grandmother was not amused. She wanted to skin you alive. You always frightened her. She said she never liked the way you watched everything, like you were a spy, and that if she was raising you, she'd get that smart-mouthness out of you in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Imagine that, instead of being amazed and thrilled that you were saying full, grammatically correct sentences, she was mad because you hadn't called her ma'am. And your father was right. You talked non-stop the rest of the day. Woo. There we go. We're still on. Good. I couldn't wait for him to get home to hear. When he got off work and came into the front door, I told you not to say anything to him till he talked to you first, so we could surprise him. He picked you up, said something ridiculous like, "Daddy's darling daughter Dessa doing on this delightful dusky day." How's? And child, he nearly dropped you like you were on fire when you said, "Fine, thank you, but Grandma's mad at me, Daddy. She wants cream for her coffee, not milk." He bawled like a baby, and you wiped his tears and told him, "Don't cry, Daddy. She's mad at Mommy and me, not you." He'd been scared to death that there was something wrong. That was when we first knew what a special child we had. Mother leaned down and splashed some of the creek water on her face. Seeing Mother like this was beautiful. Jimmie was right. This had been the best night ever. We're going to go ahead and read 24 as well. I know it's been kind of a long chapter. However, chapter 24 is only 5 pages long, so we're going to go ahead and get that done. Chapter 24. I don't like the title of this. Losing Jimmie. I couldn't tell what had been said, but I went from deep sleep to wide awake. It was still dark outside. Mother was sitting up, looking at the closed gingham curtain, with her mouth half open. Jimmie's blanket was empty. "Mother?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Someone shouted." We asked each other, "Where's Jimmie?" The shanty town was coming alive. Not like it did most mornings, with gentle sounds. Tonight it was feet hitting hard on the ground, and quick broke-off conversations. I jumped to the door and looked outside. The fire had burned itself into a dull orange glow. People were snatching their things and tossing them into blankets and sacks, mostly men. One ran by our door. I asked him, "What's wrong?" "Those dirty dogs are trying to sneak the train out early." I looked back. Mother had spread her blanket and was tossing everything we owned into it. "It's not the police, Mother. They're taking the train out early." More and more men and boys ran past the door. The little boy I'd done dishes with stumbled past, looking more lost than he had before, squeezing a ratty old suitcase to his chest. I said, "Hey!" but he didn't hear me. I stepped back into the shack. Mother reached out her hand. She was holding a folded page from my notebook. Not another drawing. Worse. I took the paper and walked out of the shack where there was more light. Dear Mother and Dessa, Mr. Z thinks we can find work. Now remember, this is Jimmie writing, so it's going to take me a bit of translating here to read this to you. Mr. Z thinks we can find work in Chicago or New York. I know you'd want to stop me, but a man's got to do what a man's got to do. I have to try. Please understand. I will write and send all I earn to general delivery in Flint. I promise. I swear. Write to me. General delivery in Chicago or maybe New York. Sis, keep up the job in school. You made us all proud, and I'll make you proud too. I swear. Please don't worry. I love you both. Jimmie Malone. This is why punctuation is so important, guys. It was hard to tell when he was done talking. Mother said, I knew he wouldn't stay much longer. We have to stop him. Jimmie can't be on his own. We don't even know who Mr. Sawbuck Zee is. I pulled my shoes on. Mother hadn't moved. Dessa, once one of these Malones decides it's time to go, nothing can stop them. I stood in the door. Can't I try? What harm would that do? Go ahead, sweetheart, but be careful. When I'm done with that Jimmie Malone, he'll be wishing he never thought of leaving us. I stepped outside our shack. I couldn't believe how many people were living in this shanty town. I'd never seen everyone at the same time. I started in the direction the men were running. I began going faster and faster. It felt like something was coming off of the running men, pushing and pulling at me to keep up. Maybe it was gravitational force, for those of you that watched my science lesson today. Just before we crossed out of the woods, an explosion of sparks and smoke came from the right. We all stopped and looked at the reddish fireball that danced over the top of trees. A man yelled, "They're firing it up!" The stream of people began moving forward. When I broke out of the trees, it was like I'd walked into a battle from King Arthur times. The freight train was stretched out like a gigantic dragon. What looked like a black and orange smoky genie squatted down over top of the engine's smokestack. People stood waiting, but it wasn't a patient wait. It was more like the spring on a clock that was being wound tighter and tighter. Then I saw why. About 10 policemen stood with billy clubs all along the sides of the trains. The crouching genie exploded up and out of the smokestack, as tall and dangerous as a volcano erupting, dancing over the stack with a roar that made the hair on my neck tingle. Everyone looked at the dark cloud and river of sparks that belched out of the smokestack, and then turned their eyes back on the police. At that second, the spring had been wound as tight as it could go, and snapped. A policeman threw down his club and stepped aside. Then 2 more did. Then the rest. I hung onto a big tree as the men ran past me toward the train. The train's wheels groaned, and the cars banged and clanked ahead. Those sounds made the men move faster. There was no way in the world I'd be able to find Jimmie amongst all these people. I promised myself to remember everything about the last time we'd talked and how happy he'd been. I grabbed hold of the last thing Jimmie said to me. Wow, sis, hasn't this been the best night ever? Whatever else happens, this is what I'll always remember about Jimmie. Not the twitches and jerks he does when he's trying to sleep, not the way his expression never changes when Mother shakes her head to let us know that there's been no word from Father, not the sadness in his eyes ever since we'd figured out he was going to stay the size of a 12-year-old his whole life. No, I'm going to remember the way that he looked so proud and lit up and carefree a few hours when he ran back to talk to Mr. Sawbuck Zee. It was like he was driving his rocket ship. When the train disappeared, and I couldn't hear the chugging of the engine, sounds came from the direction of the shantytown that had me running toward our shack faster than I'd run away. I yelled, "Mother!" and had to dodge 3 children who were coming from the shantytown like they'd seen a ghost. A woman screamed over and over as gunshots bounced around in the woods. "Mother!" This book just keeps getting more and more intense, doesn't it? Tomorrow we will go over this week's comprehension question answers, and then next week, I think we're going to actually finish the book next week. There's not very much left. Just a couple chapters. Alright, here's the questions today. What happened after Jimmie finished singing and opened the knock on the door? A. Some men said they wanted to talk to Deza about her voice, not realizing it was Jimmie. B. He punched the men because they came in with a knife. C. Deza screamed because they scared her. D. They came to say they had found Papa. How old did Jimmie tell the musician he was? Did he say he was A. 19, B. 21, C. 17, or D. 14? Number 3. Mama tells Deza her first word as a baby. What was it? Dog, Dada, or why? Number 4 is an extended response question. Why do you think Mama was telling Deza how special she was and about the first time her family heard her talk? Why do you think she would tell her that story? Number 5, where did Jimmie go? A, to find work with Mr. Z, B, to find father, C, to work picking fruit, or D, to go back to Gary? Number 6 is an extended response. How did Deza say she was going to remember Jimmie? Number 7, what made Deza run back to the camp? Was it a fire? Jimmie yelled for her, father came back, or she heard gunshots? The rest are extended response. Number 8, what do you think is going to happen next? Ooh, so what's your prediction? 9, what is the setting of this chapter? So where does this story during the chapters of 23, and 24? What is the setting of these chapters? And then number 10, what character traits do you notice about Deza just in this chapter? Think of some character traits just from this chapter of The Mighty Miss Malone. Don't forget, tomorrow, Zoom, 11 a.m. The link is on Google Classroom. It's titled Zoom number 9, and then I will also send it out tomorrow morning in GroupMe and via email. Don't forget to wear some clothes for our animal safari. We're going to go on a field trip to the zoo, so try to dress, in a safari outfit or animal print clothing, and we'll have a fun time. I'll see you then. Have a good night.